previously on In Transition.
Yeah, but in retrospect, I realized like that was my own guidance system telling me to really be there with her.
Mhm.
Um, and so it brought me closer to her in a lot of ways. It also prepared me for the relationship that we have now, because when a loved one dies, you have a relationship with their spirit or their memory.
Mhm.
You know, depending on what you believe. So yeah, I would say it was kind of everything. It was hard, it was brutal, it was beautiful, it was deeply meaningful. You know, but and she died with a smile on her face. So um I definitely I think there's something to that. I once was at a year after, no, this was the year she died, actually. I was out in LA and I was working and at this party and started chatting with this woman who had had two near death experiences.
Mm.
And she described both through illness. And the second one, she described it as that she was just filled with this overwhelming sense of love and oneness. And she was given a choice. So you can stay here or you can go back down. And she could see herself in the hospital bed and surrounded by
Mhm.
her husband and children. And I don't remember why she said she came back, but she did say that that she realized like that it actually didn't make any difference because what she felt, she could feel anywhere. And she definitely was one of those people. She had like love and light, beaming
Mhm.
out of her eyes. Um, so yeah, I think that there's a lot to that.
We are so excited to be back for part 2 of this conversation. If you haven't listened to part 1, we encourage you to go back and take a listen. Now on to the show.
Yeah. And if I had to guess, I would say that feeling of overwhelming love and ecstasy that I'd felt in these really sad and distraught moments, that to me correlates with that same kind of feeling.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, for anyone that's listening that's going through something like this, or, at some point we're all going to be going through this, right? It's inevitable. With someone in our life, ourselves, we don't know. What would you tell someone could help them navigate the transition? What did you find helpful?
Um, well, I think it's really just being present. I mean, in some of those terrible moments, I mean, yes, there's this overwhelming God love, but I also remember some really sad moments with my cousin that I felt, was just filled with like this purity of love for her. And so I would say to anyone, I mean, first of all, listen to yourself and your own guidance. Especially sometimes somebody might say, well, oh, they don't want to talk about it. But if you are having that instinct, it doesn't hurt, I think, to open the door or at least say, hey, I'm really here for you. But really being able to listen, because there's an amazing book on this called Final Gifts, and it was written by hospice workers. So for anyone going through that, I highly, highly recommend. I devoured it in those last weeks of Karen's life, and it's really about the unspoken or secret language of the dying, and they are here and they are not here, and so being around them is really about making space and listening. And, obviously, as a witness, as a loved one, you're also be very compassionate with yourself and give yourself a lot of grace too for your own needs. But I would say, as best you can, really just being with someone and listening to them. I do find that I think that those who are dying, I mean, again, everybody's different, but there can be a desire to kind of go back and do a life review or,
Mm.
and I remember this is about listening to your gut. I remember when Karen was in the hospital and she was a couple of days away from dying, and everybody was going up and they were saying their goodbyes, and there was something about it that just felt wrong to me. I felt like
Mm.
I don't know. I've already had all this time with her, and I don't think we haven't left anything unsaid. But then I got like heady about it, and I was like, well, I should tell her my favorite performance. So I started saying that and really saying a goodbye. And she was not having it. She was just like,
Stop it.
like, stop it. And so, so I think that's where the listening is really important.
Mhm.
And I think there's also a lot of anxiety around, I want to do this right. I want to do this the best way
Yeah.
possible. I'm going to read this really meaningful poem from, the prophet, or I'm going to and all of that is wonderful. And it's great to have good intentions. But the best intention I think anyone can have is to just be a channel of love and presence. That's it.
Yep. Which
It's
seems increasingly hard these days, but I see people doing it better in those circumstances.
Yeah, there's a strong motivator,
Mhm.
especially where you're aware that time
Time is
is
fleeting.
time is fleeting. Time is fleeting. Yes.
Yeah. What do you
Um,
think those that are dying need or want the most from those they're leaving behind in that time that they're going through the transition? Do you think it's the presence piece?
I do. I'm just hesitating because I'm like, I do think everybody's different, but yeah, presence and space. My cousin's husband, the one who he was the one who was given 8 months to live and then lived almost 4 years. In the last phone conversation we had, he was in the hospital, and I think that one of the reasons, and he thought this too, had done so well is because he became really a master of his own mind and energy. And so
Mm.
he meditated every day. He was very, very careful to speak positively. And that I think, so we talked this last time, and I remember he said, I do think the whole point of us being here is to experience our oneness and to remember just how very connected we are. And even when we're doing things that seem totally counter to that, there's still that intention, even in, harmful behavior or whatever, less than supportive behavior, to experience that sense of connection. And it seemed important, for him to say, and he knows I'm a writer, so I'm sure he was like, she'll get this out there.
Yep.
And actually, for anybody listening, I wrote about his passing. It's on my website. But he talked a lot about, how when he had a friend who has cancer, still living, and when Michael was first diagnosed, the friend said, I'm just going to tell you right now, people are going to treat you much differently.
Oh, I
And
imagine.
yeah, and so I don't know. I think it all came from him, but he kind of just didn't really, he was somehow like very steady in himself, very centered in himself. And you know, he asked that call, he said, did Karen go into hospice? And she didn't, because
Mm.
they didn't set that up. It was her, the decline at the very end happened pretty quickly. And so she wasn't technically in hospice, but she did have an amazing meditation teacher who came and led us all in a meditation around her bed,
Nice.
um, thanking her grandparents and their grandparents, kind of calling in all the ancestors. And he did a lot of really beautiful, I think it helped her and us. It helped everybody
Yeah.
to have him there. And then actually when um, Michael, so to answer your question, so in his case, he wanted to know, and it seemed like he felt guilty for even asking me. People will say, like, I don't want to bring up bad memories. And
Mhm.
feeling is always like, no, that's let's talk about what happened.
Yeah.
If that can be helpful to you, that's kind of why we go through difficulty, right? I don't know if it's why we go through difficulty, but it's one way we can kind of work with that, is to help other people who are in similar situations, or at the very least share, well, this is what it was like for me or for this person, or
Yep.
um, and so he also did not end up going to hospice, and he was on a ventilator. It was up in Boston, and when it became clear, we're going to take him off the ventilator, I had called the meditation teacher who helped Karen. I hadn't talked to him since, but I just,
Yeah.
people who work around death and dying are angels. There's no way about it. But he, very busy guy, made time. And, my cousin had said, do you think he can like say something for Michael? And so he had said, sure, I'd be happy to. And then the way the timing worked out, it just it wasn't aligning. And so even though I have experience with this, I felt anxious, and I thought, I just love my cousin. I love her husband. I just wanted the best for them. And so he said to me, he said, well, you can do it. And I was like, yeah, but what should I say? I'm like, can you give me a
Yeah.
PowerPoint?
You give me a
And
script.
yeah, and which is funny because I mean, I do that kind of stuff like
Yeah.
meditation, channeling, all in my work, energy work. So, but when it's a loved one, it's like everything goes out the window. And
Yeah.
so he said to me, he said, well, you said he was a meditator, right? And I said, yeah. Um, and so he said, well, why don't you just meditate with him? And I thought, oh, he would love that. So we all, went into this little tiny ICU room, and I did say something. I don't remember what I said. And then my cousin, his sister-in-law said something. But really it was just, there was this real feeling of groundedness and love.
Mm.
And just, again, just the desire to be with someone you love. I don't know what is more profound than that.
Yeah.
And so, and when a person is dying, there can be a moment of fear, or, like the meditation teacher described it as like, it's almost like they're walking up a mountain in the dark. And when they get to see the other side and they see the top and the sunlight, it'll be great. But just in case that fear comes up, it's all the more important for you to just really hold steady in love and be there
Mm.
as a reference point. Be encouraging, um, whatever feels right, in the
Yeah.
moment. And so I didn't get any fear from him at that time. I think he was very maybe as at peace as someone could be.
Yeah.
And but so they took him off the ventilator, and the nurses had said, this could happen very quickly. And so after a while, everybody kind of quieted down, and I was just meditating, like really intensely meditating. And I could almost like feel I was getting visions of him, and he was happy. He was like riding a motorbike. He was in a tux. He's like,
Oh,
so
nice.
I felt nothing but like joy from his soul. And it's hard to explain because the context is devastating, but those two things I think do exist. And um, so, but he lived for 2 more hours. So we were meditating and it went by like that, like
I bet.
absolutely. And some of the other people in the room, at least one other person had mentioned that she was getting visions, and especially when she was holding his
Wow.
hand, it shocked her because she said, I don't get visions.
Yeah.
And some of them tracked. Like it was really kind of wild in a lot of ways. But I guess it's a long way to answer your question. But I think what the dying want and need may be different, and just follow their lead.
Hmm.
You also hear about people like whose families have been gathered around their loved one's deathbed, and they go out for dinner and their loved one dies as soon as they leave.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
and I don't, I
I feel like
think,
that happens a lot. I feel like the dying are intentional about that, right? Do you feel
yeah,
like they don't want people to experience the physical act of them passing? Because that would be too painful.
yeah, I mean, it might be that they feel more tethered if their loved
Mhm.
ones are here.
Yeah. Like I got to hang on. They want
Yes,
me to hang on.
yes, it might. Yeah, I definitely think that's intentional. And I think in its own way, this might sound weird, but I do believe that every death is the perfect death for that person and in the way. I mean, I'm sure, I know it's hard to wrap our heads around that when
Yeah.
the death is traumatic.
Yeah.
That this doesn't try to like gloss over the trauma or brutality of a brutal death. But on another level, there's another truth I believe that also is in existence, and that's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. Is how do you hold the duality of this? When in 2018, so this was a year after Karen died, and I went to go get some. I don't even remember what kind of work it does. I think this guy was like an acupuncturist, but he also did energy work. And at the time, I had this like, um, I don't even know what you call it. I guess like a fling with someone who this guy had been my friend, and then we weren't friends, and it just brought up, I mean, I was still raw, and so it brought up a lot, and I was telling the acupuncturist about this, and he said, I really think you should meditate on your own death. And I was like, what?
Whoa.
And he said, yeah, I want you to go home and to imagine dying alone. um, and so I said, okay, I guess.
Okay.
And I think I'm trying to remember exactly what his thinking was. I think it was something like that a lot of people, maybe most people, I don't know, have a fear of dying alone. And if it's subconscious or whatever. And if you do this meditation, I think it's a Buddhist meditation. If
Hmm.
you do this meditation, it will resolve that fear.
Oh,
And so, and for me, it did. I
wow.
mean, I don't know that I ever had a conscious fear of dying alone, but when I went into meditation, I went to the most dire alone experience you can imagine. Like I was in a ditch on the side of the
Oh,
road,
wow.
nowhere, like not
Okay.
even in a hospital, but like
Hmm.
alone, alone. And it was the most beautiful experience because as in this meditation, obviously I'm still alive, as I'm crossing over, um, it was like everything was lit up in terms of like the trees, the animals, the stars, and I experienced that oneness, like, wow, we really are connected to everyone and everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do recommend that meditation. I don't know if anybody's called to try it. I found it super liberating, and I often tell people, I'm like, no matter how I die, it was great. Like, just
Yeah. I was like,
trust me,
it sounds amazing.
it was beautiful in a
I'd love
ditch.
to drop a resource about that because I feel like anything we can do to mitigate the future fear
Yes,
and
yeah,
start to come to terms because it's a certainty. It
hmm,
is a certainty. So why not start being okay with it? Even like normalizing the fact that we're like talking about it to me is
yeah,
powerful as well. Because we
yeah,
don't talk about it or we don't want to. We're like, no, that makes it too real, or I don't want to feel those feelings. Like it's bad. Like it's
right.
inherently bad to die. And
Yeah.
I'm
Well, it
like,
is. On one hand, on the one hand, it
yeah.
is.
But at the same time, like if you are spiritual at all, and I feel like people really, even if they weren't before they experienced any act of death, whether it's their own or they witness it, there's a spiritual element to it where you do
Yes.
start to realize like the oneness and like the peace.
Hmm.
Like it's another level like that we probably couldn't understand until we went through it.
Yes. And I guess that's the thing, right? That's the other thing about witnessing a loved one
Mhm.
die. They're living in what is the great mystery of life, and we're close to it, but we'll never know until we're there ourselves, really.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, there is there is this great book called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. I forget the author's name, but if I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It's really great. It's this woman whose brother died, and I think in a car accident. And a few weeks after his death, he just starts talking to her. And she's kind of like, oh my God, what's going on? But really clearly. And he instructs her to write this book and will give her these weird directions, like ask your
Mhm.
friend about like green tea or something. And she's like, okay. And the friend is like, what? I just had a, you know,
What?
but it's really good. It's a really
Okay.
comforting book. And what else? I mean, I think another aspect of this fear is, when we lose a loved one, there's a part of us that dies too.
Yep.
Um, and so that can be really, I think it's just human nature. We're evolving creatures, and yet we also tend to resist change. Or some of us more than others, I think.
It's true.
Um, and I know for me, as much as I love change, and I love newness, I definitely have some really stubborn parts that are not at all like.
they're not on board with they're not on board with you.
No, no, exactly. So I think some of that fear that is not only like the sadness and around losing someone we love, but I think some of it is who I don't even know who I am, and in certain
Mhm.
cases, especially with spouses, like who am I without this,
Without them. Yeah.
um, or a best friend, or
Yeah.
so I think that takes guts. It takes guts to be present to your own metaphorical death.
Yeah.
Um,
It does.
and I don't
It
I don't know
does.
that there's any way to do it. One way to do it. I think grief is and grieving, because it's not like, I remember, a childhood friend of mine was on one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center.
Oh wow.
And um, she was 25 when that happened. And, so was I. And so really inexperienced. And I remember, I always had a pretty easy time crying growing up. And when she died, I just felt this like block of ice. And
Mm.
we were really close as kids and had grown apart as adults. So it wasn't, I felt weird about it too. Like, do I even have a right to grieve this? And what, like, it was
Yeah.
confusing in all these ways. But what I eventually realized was, if I were to let myself just feel, not even like my loss, but just that it's just sad. If you're a feeling person and you're witness to a tragedy, a lot of feelings are going to come up.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, there was this like felt like there was a block of ice, and I felt guilty about it. And I was like, why I haven't done this correctly. Um, and it was challenging, and I never really let it go. Every year I'd be like, think about it, I'd pray, and it just never quite clicked. And eventually I realized, like, oh, because she was pure sunshine. And for me to really connect to that in any personal way would also like really open up inside of me, grappling with what I was dealing with as a kid at home, which was not sunshine. So
Mm.
in a lot of ways, and I just didn't want that. I thought, well, if I could just cry for her and not,
Not for me.
not for me and not any of those other things. But
Mhm.
so I think it's really, our losses are intertwined, and grieving one thing can lead to grieving a lot of other things. So I think
Yeah.
that's also why there's this reluctance or guardedness or, block of ice, is like, do I trust myself to handle what this could potentially bring up? Because,
Mm.
and we don't know until we're really in it. But
Yeah.
I do think that's our medicine. I think that grief is medicinal in that way. Can be.
100%. You're making me think of a friend who's going through something really similar right now. And she's kind of, I don't want to say she's judging herself because she's not experiencing grief in the way she expected after losing a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to your point, there's more behind it, why that block of ice is coming up. And there's a lot more that will be unearthed when she's ready to go there.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
It's a lot. It definitely, I'm sure, with a parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of round things out. And I keep going back to this idea of how, I feel like as a species, we're so obsessed with the idea of closure,
Mhm.
right? Everything needs closure. Like it needs a nice bow wrapped around it. I need to feel good about it. Like just about everything. Like if I break up with someone or,
Yeah.
I decide to move on to another chapter of my life, like I need to close the book on that. And this is like the ultimate kind of event that would create that feeling of I need closure.
Right.
Do you think there is closure in death?
That's a great question. I I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, there's I think there's a couple ways to look at it. Oh my God, I don't know which way to go. Yeah, I mean, I think, um, I don't know. I don't actually relate to that word. So,
No, to closure.
no, no. I mean, there's a sense of being at peace. I
Mhm.
think like um, accepting the things
Okay.
that happen, accepting losses, but,
Then go with that.
okay.
Because
Okay.
acceptance is really hard when it comes to death, I think. Especially like I can imagine in the case of your cousin, accepting someone dying before their time. This is something you hear all the time, or like, oh my gosh, this isn't fair. Like, or the parents go, it should have been me. Like,
Right.
this is wrong. How do you
Yeah.
find the acceptance in those scenarios?
Oh, wow. I don't, I mean,
Do
um,
you?
let me come up with a personal example or a personal connection to that, because I do think, our ways into, um, anything like forgiveness, acceptance. It really is one of those things that's so personal. I mean, I mean, personally, I give myself a lot of time and a lot of space. My faith helps me a lot. Maintaining a kind of connection to loved ones on the other side, whether by lighting candles for them, in churches, on their birthdays, doing something that they would have loved, honoring um, honoring the dead is important. I think that's an important part of it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That's a big question. I feel
That's a big
like
question, right?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Well, we'll give everyone something to ponder because I feel like that's kind of the thing we're seeking in that transition is like, oh, am I going to get that acceptance or that closure? If that's like the word you resonate with, will I feel good about it at the end of the day? Will I have said everything I needed to say? Will I feel at peace? Because I think that's where we really think the struggle is going to be. There's going to be just this lack of peace at the end or feeling like there's something unresolved.
Yes, yes. And I think, I mean, there does come a time where usually there are certain things you have to give up. Like, okay, I guess we're not going to go do that last outing. Or I remember my last birthday that Karen was alive, she had an August birthday and I have a February birthday. And her favorite thing to do was to get on a boat and, sail around New York Harbor. And a February birthday, there's no sailboats. And
Cold?
I really, really, yeah, I said, can we just get on a ferry and go around Manhattan? And I found this 2-hour cruise. And I was like, or we can go horseback riding. And she was like, what about a spa? Do you want to do a spa day? But for some reason, I was really insistent, like, no, I want to get on a boat with you. So I went to Bed Bath and Beyond and bought this like big fluffy blanket. And it was great. And it was a really great memory. But I think it also, when I look back, I'm like, we should have just gone to the spa. That's what she wanted to do. So I think, a lot of things come back to listening and presence. Like what is really important. Let me listen to what's not being said. Let me listen to what is being said in that case.
Yeah.
And really, because even if you have like 1 minute of pure presence, that's perfection. I think it's like trusting in the perfection of how life unfolds, even when there are things that you wish had gone differently. And sometimes that's like a dual track, where you're kind of grappling, but also reaching out to your faith, reaching out to some sense of transcendence, because that that's connection and feeling
Yeah.
connected, I think is truly the great healer.
100%. Percent. Well, Suzanne, this has been such an amazing talk. I always like to end things just hearing from you because I truly believe everyone is always in some state of transition
Yes.
at any given point. And I always like to hear, where are you at currently? What are you navigating in the world of transition? That either excites you, scares you, is the next phase.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good question. It's so funny because I'm not at home right now. I'm away. I'm doing a little writing retreat, and it feels transitional for sure. And I kind of like these built-in mini transitions, like it's like a mini corridor. And I'm working on a creative project. So I came up here to something I've been working on for a while and wanted like really more intense kind of focus. And when I first got here, I pulled into the driveway and there was this David Bowie song that I'd never heard. And it's the chorus was transition, transmission, transition, transmission. And so I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And it's almost like, yeah, every transition does have some kind of transmission, some, message. Yeah. So to me, this creative project is, it's something that's intensely personal to me. And I'm really in the throes of that right now. And I just had a big kind of breakthrough, which I'll spare you because we'd go on and on. I would go on and on. But
Now I'm intrigued.
it's yeah, so I'm kind of really in that and just very presently in that world. So that's my biggest
That
one.
sounds exciting. Well, I'll be excited to hopefully hear more about what's coming out of this transition. And obviously, there's so many things I feel like I could dive in topic wise with you, like that we didn't on this podcast, including your path to becoming what you are in the world today, because that's, I'm sure, super fascinating.
Well, if I can add really quickly,
Yeah.
I actually, this is why I thought of it for this podcast.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry that I didn't mention it in the whole hour and a half we've been talking, but I had been doing intuitive work, so helping people get in touch, navigate life transitions. That's my job. And really it's that listening skill, listening to what's not being said and helping people listen to themselves and how to decipher what are the messages you're already getting. What do how do you know what you know is a huge topic of interest. And so but I used to be very private about it. So it was not on my website. And I just thought I had all these like hangups. Like if I'm out in the world like this, then that will somehow like tarnish or hurt my writing, or I won't be seen as serious or whatever. I remember at Karen's hospital bed, not when she was dying, this was like about 6 weeks before. And I don't remember exactly even what was happening, but a lot of like wild things happened, toward the end of her life that had this side effect of really making my thinking explode around a lot of things. And one day I just remember thinking like, why? Why do I hide that? Like, that's so dumb. That's so dumb. Like, this is what I do. And so that was a direct result. So that was the part of, that really her loss did it burned off. I always say grief is truth serum, and it really burned off a lot of kind of bullshit. Like, who am I listening to? Like, why, where does this idea come from? And
You embraced that side of yourself that you
yes,
were keeping hidden to a degree. Like, I know we've talked, like, you worked mostly on referral and people would find you and you weren't out in the world, like, saying that you did all these things. But it sounds like her death allowed you to kind of embrace that part of yourself a little bit more. Put it out there into the world.
Yes, I would say my whole self. It really, that's the E Cummings. Whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves. We find empathy. So yeah, it feels like there can be a lot of authenticity. Let's just say that.
Yeah. That's a perfect word to say it and a beautiful way to end. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or potentially work with you?
I have a website. So it's Suzanne-Guillette.com. So they can find me there. It has my email on the contact.
Perfect. Everyone reach out to Suzanne. She's definitely gifted. I know I enjoyed our time together when we actually did some of that intuitive work. Thank you so much for spending the last 90 minutes or so with me and with our listeners. And hopefully you'll be able to come back and share some more.
Yes, thank
magic.
you so much, Lauren. I
Yeah.
really appreciate this.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We appreciate our listeners more than you could ever know. If you liked any part of what you heard, please, please, please do us a favor and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're willing to go a step further, we would love for you to leave us a review and send this episode to a friend that you feel would be served by it in any way. We are so excited to finally share more about Catalyst, the community that we are building in conjunction with this podcast. Our mission with Catalyst is to create an authentic, safe, and inclusive space for heart-centered, growth-minded, multi-passionate women to navigate their life's transitions by building meaningful relationships, learning from one another, and growing into the best version of themselves, and maybe even make the world a little bit better in the process. If you're interested in becoming a founding member of Catalyst, we would love to learn more about you and have you apply at wearecatalyst, all one word, .social. We only have a limited number of spots for this founding member round, so be sure to get your application in soon. Again, the website to apply is wearecatalyst.social. We look forward to the possibility of getting to know you on a deeper level and supporting you in navigating your life's transitions. We cannot wait to have you join us for the next episode. Until then, we encourage you to lean into your community and embrace the growth that inevitably happens when you're in transition. See you guys next week.